Hello, everyone. My name is Wes Adams. I'm the policy manager for the Coalition to End Social Isolation and Loneliness. Thank you again for joining today's breakout session, which is the Aspen Institute's panel with technology innovators. This breakout section will focus on a very important topic of the potential impact of social technologies like Facebook or Marco Polo in helping navigate loneliness and connecting people. We're honored to have join us today Kristine Gloria, the Associate Director of Emerging Technology Initiative, Aspen Digital of the Aspen Institute, who will moderate today's discussion. This session will feature an accomplished group of panelists from the tech industry and will look to specifically assess the opportunities and challenges for research and development. We have a fairly tight window today to cover a very important topic, so on that note, I'm going to hand this over to Kristine. Kristine, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Wes. I appreciate the intro, very kind of you. Again, I'm Kristine Gloria. I'm Associate Director of Emerging Technologies with Aspen Digital, a public policy program at the Aspen Institute. I'm so glad to have all of you with us for this breakout session on the issue of loneliness, a condition that has come into more focus during this very difficult year. For this breakout, as Wes mentioned, we will dive deeper into loneliness as it relates to social connection and technology. And as we've heard a few times over the course of this forum, there's a wide variety of perspectives on the potential benefits and harms that digital media may play in our personal experiences of loneliness. Today's panel will explore these issues further, consider what the scientific evidence suggests, and then provide insight into how each organization is approaching loneliness and social connection. A quick note before we get started, time permitting, we will try to open it up for public Q&A. If you have questions, just feel free to send to me, Kristine Gloria, and or all panelists a message via the chat function at the bottom of your screen. And I'll go over that again once we get to that point. So with that, I am so grateful to be joined by this amazing group of thought leaders and innovators from across the tech industry. Let's briefly get through these introductions. So I'd like to begin with Danielle Ramo, Senior Director in Research at Hopelab and an Adjunct Associate Professor of Psychiatry at UC San Francisco. As you'll see on the screen, Hopelab is a social innovation lab committed to supporting and improving the health and happiness of young people through the co-creation and distribution of behavior change tech. And we'll hear more from Danielle and specifically some of the work and services that they've produced in the last year. Next, we have Laure, Head of Research of Joya Communications, who heads the Marco Polo application and channels by Marco Polo. Marco Polo is an algorithm-free, healthy social technology. I'm not sure if many of you have used it or not. I personally have it with my family, and we love it. And it's focused on real, authentic connection. So again, Laure will get into a little bit of that specifically as we open up the panelists. Next, we have Eden Litt, from a researcher at Facebook. Eden is a master at qualitative and quantitative methods as it explores social media's impact on today's biggest societal changes. I've had the pleasure of working with Eden over this past few months on specifically loneliness and social connection. And I'm so glad for her to be here and looking forward to this discussion. And then finally, but not least, we have Tatyana Mamut, the head of product at Nextdoor, also an app on my phone currently. Nextdoor connects neighbors to each other and to everything nearby. And we'll get into specifics of the differences between all of these different services and where they overlap and what they're trying to achieve. So with that, I'd love to go ahead and bring up all the panelists into view. Awesome. Good morning, ladies. How are you? Okay. All right. So the way this is going to run is I have a couple questions for each of you, and I'm going to open it up to, I'll call on you, and you can let me know if you'd like to answer it or not. It's up to you. But we do have, I wanted just to kind of start out with, I would say, a bit of an opportunity to let you give a bit more description about yourself beyond the bio and the 2 sentences that I just read, and more about the context of your work and the organization and the mission that you're trying to achieve. So the question is, what is your organization's approach to helping navigate the effects of loneliness, and why is this a priority area for you? And I'd love to first start off with Danielle, if you don't mind, Danielle, taking the first question.
I don't mind at all, Kristine. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks for having me on this panel to talk about the topic of loneliness. First, I'd like to give just a brief overview of Hopelab and what we do in case folks aren't aware of us. Hopelab is a social innovation lab. We make behavior change tech to support adolescent health and emotional well-being. We're part of the Omidyar Group family of philanthropic organizations, and our legacy is in cancer survivorship. Our first product was a video game that helped young people adhere to their chemotherapy medication regimens. Now we've been working in areas, some of the most challenging problems related to adolescent and young adult health and well-being, including maternal child health, teen vaping, the mental health of queer young people, and what I'm here to talk about today is loneliness, specifically among college students. Hopelab creates technology primarily using two strategies. We partner with organizations that can help us develop technology, and we partner directly with the young people whose lives we aim to affect. In the case of loneliness, we've worked closely with a startup out of Denver called Grit Digital Health to create an app called Nod that addresses the high rate of loneliness among college students today. And I'd be happy to talk more about that a little later.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Danielle. Laure?
Yeah, so as Kristine, you mentioned, Marco Polo is a face-to-face video communication app that you can use even when you're not live. And it was developed by our founders who themselves were parents and wanted to show how technology could be used in a way that was healthy and also working on something that brings you joy could be meaningful for their kids. And we have, when I started at Marco Polo, we were particularly looking at groups. So I studied groups for about 1.5 years and was really fascinated by the stories that I heard in Marco Polo users. For example, we had a group of women veterans who used Marco Polo to actually make sure that each other got out of bed. And so there were a lot of interesting loneliness and health related stories that we heard about. And so I got very interested in learning more about that. And I was already doing a lot of work around social connection before. So I guess fundamentally interested in having more of a conversation in the tech world around how we can support people in healthy ways of connecting.
That's great. I have a couple of follow-ups, but we'll put a pin in until we get through everybody else. Eden, if you don't mind making yourself available.
Yes, hello everyone, and thanks so much for the intro. Really, really excited to be here. Why loneliness at Facebook? It's a great question. And for Facebook, no matter how you slice it, social is at the heart of the company. And loneliness at its core is about people's social needs not being met. And so helping people connect, have meaningful interactions, strengthen those relationships, these things are fundamental to our mission of bringing people closer together. And it's why we build products that give people the ability to call, message, share updates with their loved ones, all the way to creating tools for people to fundraise, to sell things to each other, to donate, to check in on each other during crises like COVID. So we believe that understanding the space of loneliness and social connection really, really deeply, and then more and more trying to build technology that has these core understandings at the fore. This is critical not only for staying true to our mission, but critical for the long-term success as a company. And I might actually even venture as far as saying that it's critical for the social fabric of society more generally.
Great. I'm sure we all have a bunch of responses to that, which we will get to in a bit. Bring up Tatyana, Nextdoor.
Yeah, great. So Nextdoor, hopefully all of you have been on it and communicate and plug into your own neighborhoods with the Nextdoor app. Nextdoor was really founded to bridge the online and the offline worlds. Our founders in 2010 read a Pew Research study that showed that 1/3 of people did not know a single neighbor by name. Another third could only name 1 to 2 neighbors. And even though people were spending more and more time With technology, even in 2010, they were spending less and less time with each other. They were spending less and less time in the real world. And so Nextdoor was really founded as the bridge between the online and the offline world. Because we focus on proximity and helping people to really connect with others who are around them, we create a social fabric and a social connection where people know that they can actually rely on the people around them. These are real neighbors. There are real people at real addresses, real people who are around you, who are available to you, who will reach out. We currently work with a neighborhood vitality advisory board because, again, our mission is really around vital neighborhoods, online to offline, personal connection. And Dr. Kelly Harding, who is one of the advisors on our neighborhood vitality advisory board, her research really shows that that having social connections in the real world is incredibly critical. In fact, being socially isolated, not feeling that you could rely on anyone who would show up, at your house, who would show up to help you, is almost as bad as smoking an entire pack of cigarettes a day, right? It's about the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's worse than obesity. And so Nextdoor is here to really help bridge this gap between the online interactions and the offline world, because people are proximate, they can get together, they can rely on each other, and they can actually feel like they are not traveling alone in the world.
That's wonderful. And, I think you guys have touched on a lot of different approaches and ways of getting people to socially connect. One question that rings top of mind here is you all have very different audiences. Right, Danielle, you focus on a lot of the college students, whereas, Facebook Nextdoor have a fairly wide range of ages. I'd like to hear some comment onto, decisions as to how do you know what service or what technology best serves certain groups, and how did you learn that? What are you learning? Are there any changes currently in understanding that? Does anyone want to take a first stab at answering that? Okay, Tatyana.
Yeah, I'd be happy to address that. So Nextdoor, what makes Nextdoor rather unique is that it's a social network that's based on proximity, not based on following other people that have the same point of view as you. And so one of the things that we have on our platform, it is an incredible mix of people with different points of view, people of different ages, people of different backgrounds. The thing that they have in common is their proximity to place and their passion for the place. And that actually starts to bridge so many divides that are happening in society today. So one example is when we launched the Help Map right after we started, in the COVID shutdown, we actually started to see organically on our platform, young people posting to Nextdoor saying, I'm a young person, I live alone. If you're elderly and in the neighborhood, I'd love to run an errand for you. What we didn't see is a lot of elderly people reaching out to ask for help. And when we did a little bit of research, and we found out that asking for help is incredibly hard, no matter who you are in society. So the Help Map came out of that insight, and it allowed people to mark themselves as helpers and then kind of connect with elderly people in the neighborhood. One of my friends in the neighborhood, a young tech professional, she marked herself on the Help Map. An older gentleman actually asked her to help him set up his Zoom so he could talk to his family over Zoom. She went to his house, found out that his computer was too old, and actually gifted him her old MacBook Air so that he could, talk to his family. So these types of connections, there are many things that actually bridge us, and creating a platform where people can actually make real world connections and express their passion for place and their helpfulness actually helps to bridge those divides. And that's how we think about it. What do we have more in common than less in common, right? And how do we start to bridge people that usually are very far apart, on other platforms?
That's great. Does anyone else want to?
Yeah, well, I just, it's similar for us at Marco Polo because one of the sort of fascinating side effects of our technology is that people can't interrupt each other. And so what we've learned is that people are able to have these conversations with family through Marco Polo that they feel very uncomfortable with in other platforms like, sorry, other live or even on social media where it feels more dangerous. They can, let the person speak and then they can think about it and they can respond on their time. And, there's not so much potential for vitriol. So yeah, it's a very similar thing. And I think also for us, we're interested because most of our users, we didn't start like many technologies do among college students. We were a family platform first. And so we have lots and lots of older people who use the technology. And that's been a focus to help make sure that they can easily use the product so that these kinds of connections can happen.
Great. Danielle, you wanted to also mention something?
Yes, thanks. We too, like Nextdoor and Marco Polo, were responding to a particular opportunity space around loneliness in college. And unfortunately, the opportunity came because there was such a high need to address high rates of loneliness and mental health problems among young adults aged 18 to 25 in the United States. A 2019 survey, for example, showed that over 3/4 of college students reported feeling extremely lonely, and this was pre-COVID. On college campuses, administrators and families were dealing with increased rates of depression, anxiety, leaving college early due to mental health problems, and also due to social reasons. People endorsing that they didn't find their tribe, college didn't meet their social goals. And colleges were already thinking about this. There is a large need and desire on the part of colleges to meet the mental health needs of their students. But on some campuses, there was one counselor for every 4,000 students, which can't possibly meet this need. So we wanted to create something that was more immediately available to students and help them meet their own social goals when they got to college, which is a very unique period in all of our lives. It's a major transition. It's a time when people are often coming to an entirely new place. Sometimes they're moving to a new area, and they often have grand ideas about what their social lives will look like during this period. And when their ideas don't meet their expectations, or when their experience doesn't meet their expectations, it can be crushing. So a big, very specific thing that we thought we knew we had to do with the Nod app is help make those expectations a little more grounded in reality. Making friends does take work. Making friends is hard. And give students some strategies to help set them up for success. First, in person, primarily offline outside of our app, and then in our current virtual world, a lot of the strategies that we're suggesting have to be a little more virtual.
Gotcha. That's, I hear a lot between the group of you this notion of having to connect both online and offline and making sure that they complement each other. And interestingly enough, yesterday during the opening keynote, David Brooks had mentioned that we're actually suffering from like a blindness epidemic where we're unable to hear, we feel like we aren't heard by others. In that sense, is technology, the platforms that you guys have created and the ability to connect is, as much as there is the opportunity to make the connection on the technology side, how far can it really be to get us to connect outside of technology? Like I think, Tatyana mentioned it, the help map, which gets you physically out of your space and maybe off your phone for a second. But I'm kind of curious as to what are some of the limits here, and really, is that something that technology should even worry about, or is it it's here as a conduit to make the connection, right? Is that what's the main purpose? And then figuring out how to foster, the development of a relationship is something that is on the onus of maybe the society or our culture. And I'm curious to hear if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Well,
yep, Tatyana.
Tatyana, Okay, so I think that it's absolutely critical for us to recognize that our products are still used by human beings who live in real bodies in real space. And so until we like plug into the matrix and are disembodied, beings, the face-to-face connection is incredibly important. In fact, during COVID, we've actually seen that it's become more important, a lot less, to have proximate interactions and offline connections. In fact, before COVID, we did a study and 63% of people thought it was important to plug into their neighborhood and sort of connect with their neighbors. Now it's 82%. So it's gone up by 20% during COVID. And the other piece is we also fast-tracked the launch of our groups feature. And what's interesting about the Nextdoor groups feature is that these are groups of people who are proximate. And so they often get together offline. So in my neighborhood, there's a mediocre tennis players group, right? So socially distant because you're on opposite sides of the courts, but these are people who, they're not going to work anymore, right? They're not commuting anymore, right? Their normal social networks, their ability to see people face to face is breaking down. And so they are flocking to Nextdoor groups to find people who are nearby that they can play tennis with. Or we have a puppy play date group in my neighborhood as well, right? People get together, again, socially distanced in the park while their dogs play together. But those human connections, again, we are people, our interactions are fundamentally, kind of mediated by chemistry. Like, wouldn't we all love to be together, in face-to-face for this panel, right? Wouldn't that be just so much more satisfying as human beings? And so remembering that we are human is part of our jobs as technologists, because we are building products for people, for embodied people who live in real space.
That's great. Laure?
Yeah, so it's interesting because, even before COVID, our lives have just become more and more fragmented from the people who we are most close to. And this isn't just because of technology. This is about people moving and working shift work and, just having different schedules and being busy and having, to drive kids around all day and, all kinds of things like that. So I think it is an aspiration to have people be more physically connected, but it's also a challenge, but sort of by the same, maybe a different token, I guess. The way that a lot of technology's business models have oriented around engagement, news feeds, ads in feeds that are keeping people on platforms are a thing that I think needs to be addressed if we're going to be serious about making real connections and getting people back into personal in-space connection.
Absolutely. And I think all of you have mentioned a little bit of a pre-COVID, post-COVID look at this. And I'm curious, again, what are there some learnings specific to the pandemic that is informing, what you guys are creating and producing in the future? Are we looking at maybe a different way of understanding social connection? Is that being changed because of the pandemic? Curious to hear your thoughts on, some of the learnings as we're going through this within your space of social connection and technology. Anyone, Eden, you want to start us off on this one?
Sure. So a lot of people might not know this, but we actually have quite a large and growing research team at Facebook. And the job of researchers at the company is really to make Facebook better by talking to people. And this is actually one of the reasons why I personally came to Facebook as a researcher from academia, because to me, there was nothing more magical than getting the chance to spend time unpacking these really complex societal challenges like loneliness and social connection, and then getting to make the technology better based on what we're learning. So on just the topic of loneliness alone at Facebook, we've spent, hundreds of hours interviewing people and surveying tens of thousands of people from a bunch of countries around the world to understand how do people navigate feelings of loneliness, what makes people feel more or less lonely, what role does social media play in that. So for example, some of the top activities that we've identified for things that make people feel less lonely are things like volunteering and meeting new people. And then external experts are a huge part of this equation. So for instance, this summer, Facebook and the Aspen Institute co-hosted 3 roundtables and a panel, I think with 60 experts coming from a wide range of area, all focused on things related to loneliness and social connection. And we just released a report from Aspen and Facebook, which Kristine beautifully wrote. But I actually think that this report does a really, really nice job of summarizing what we know and what we've learned about loneliness more generally in the world of tech, as well as what we've learned about loneliness and COVID specifically. So one example of that, one of the major takeaways from one of the roundtables was that we don't actually have strong evidence that indicates levels of loneliness have increased during the pandemic. And I have to admit, like I was, as a researcher studying social connection and loneliness and knowing all the crazy things that are happening right now to our social lives, I was actually really, really surprised by this. And sitting on it and talking to a bunch of others, I think there are a lot of really great hypotheses or explanations for why maybe we aren't seeing changes with loneliness right now, from methodological challenges around how we even measure loneliness and how we measure it over time, to theoretical explanations, like a lot of people are finding really interesting ways right now to stay connected and to interact, whether that's, doing Zumba in your backyard with your neighbor or attending, virtual graduation ceremonies. On our platforms, we've seen record-breaking numbers of people having online interactions on our platforms. I do want to just quickly caveat this by saying that this research doesn't suggest that people aren't feeling a lot of really painful feelings right now. And this isn't intended to state, loneliness doesn't matter, or that people aren't ever feeling lonely during the pandemic, or that no one is feeling lonely. We do see certain groups are feeling loneliness even more so. We've touched upon some of those, like younger adults and people who live alone. And it's possible that some people who are listening today, maybe they've come across research that suggests something different and would love, to hear if that's the case. But regardless, what these findings really do suggest to us is that nuances really, really matter. And we need to push on our assumptions in this space. We need to caveat our language that we're using when we're talking about our findings in various studies. We need to dig deeper into the measures and methods that we're using. And we need to nuance the who, that we're thinking about and who we're talking about when it comes to loneliness, and who we're designing for when we're designing with loneliness in mind. Kristine, I think did we share a link to the report?
Yeah, we can push one we'll put it in the chat here in a second so that everyone can access it. That's great, and I appreciate you bringing it up. Oh, Danielle?
I just wanted to thank Eden for, first of all, bringing to our attention the good number of studies now. We're starting to see data pouring in from large samples throughout the whole United States, indeed showing that people actually are not on average more lonely through COVID. But an important caveat that of course we're thinking so much about at Hopelab, where we're trying to address loneliness among young adults, is that we're actually seeing loneliness go up over the last 6 months or so, specifically among young adults. So we are particularly concerned about this and thinking about how to adapt a tool that we made to help college students support social connections in the real world, which already was a concern pre-COVID. And now 2 things are happening. Not only are we seeing loneliness increase under COVID, but many of the strategies that we suggested through the app are not able to happen in person anymore. So Eden, you were talking about the science of social connection and ways that large social tools can take advantage of things that we know are helpful in fostering our ability and feelings of being connected to folks and our overall happiness. Things like expressing gratitude, things like volunteering, giving of ourselves, things like making connections with others, like Tatyana's media mediocre tennis group, which I would love to see if I can find. I'm going to go look one up after this. And all of these things we know are absolutely impactful. In the context of COVID, specifically for the college student experience, we immediately had to pivot our tool to adapt to an entirely virtual college experience in the spring. And we did that with Nod. So we took the opportunity to rapidly adjust all of the ideas and strategies that we suggest for college students that were in the first version of Nod to make them entirely virtual. And a lot of the strategies can indeed be expressed virtually. So reaching out to a friend might look a little bit different in a virtual world than it would in person, but there's no doubt that technology can enable these reach outs. It will feel good and meaningful to just get a text from a friend letting them know you're thinking about them, even when we can't necessarily connect in person. And I think a lot of us have experienced that in so many contexts in our lives. With our Nod tool now, we've adapted to both the potential for some in-person connections as well as virtual connections. So the strategies in the current version of Nod that's available to colleges and to students is meant to meet the needs of whatever the situation is at one's college. But we have to be adaptive in this environment. There is absolutely no doubt to that.
I just wanted to also appreciate Eden for bringing this up. So even before COVID, the loneliness is a U-shaped problem. So, you know, it's a problem for younger people and it's a problem for older people. And I have seen some polls that suggest that for older people, loneliness has increased as well. I think it's also important to distinguish between social and emotional loneliness. So social loneliness is feeling like you don't have enough of a social network, whereas emotional loneliness is feeling like you don't have a deep connection with others. And a lot of the really negative effects of loneliness are more tied to emotional loneliness than they are to social loneliness. Young people tend to feel social loneliness. Older people tend to feel emotional loneliness. They've lost people who were their deep ties, or people have moved over time, and so they're not connected. And so the interventions for those two things would be different. And certainly, it's important for us to address both. But I think that what Danielle is getting at is really solving the problem for college students who are feeling this sense of social loneliness, especially now, and that for older people, the real life critical stuff is about helping them feel a true sense of connection.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to provide a few more data points. We're working with Dr. Julianne Holt-Lundstedt, who spoke yesterday on a KIND challenge. And so she's doing research on how some of the interventions that we're creating, some of the products that we've created at Nextdoor can actually help bring people together, especially during this time. And so some of the research that she has discovered is that knowing 6 neighbors can really have a huge and positive impact on mental health, right? I don't think we were in a good place, honestly, as a society when we started COVID. So, but we can actually make interventions. And I think it's really great that right now, people are sort of looking for new ways to connect with people, right? And people are more open, right? And more adaptive, right? To new possibilities. So, just 6 neighbors, knowing 6 neighbors can have a massive impact on mental health. So what did we do with that finding? We actually are right now starting to roll out in beta an idea called intro posts. So when someone is new to the neighborhood or someone joins Nextdoor, we ask them to write an intro post. That intro post is distributed to everyone in the neighborhood. They don't have to have followers, they don't have to have friends, they don't have to already have a social network, right? That intro post is distributed to the neighborhood. So far, just in beta, over 400,000 people have introduced themselves to their neighbors, generating 2.3 million replies and 4.5 million reactions. And I read through a lot of these posts, and it's people saying like, hi, I'm new to the neighborhood. And people will say like, welcome to the neighborhood. I love this restaurant. Or if you ever, need a recommendation for a plumber, I've got someone for you. So it's these high utility conversations that make people feel like, oh, wow, I actually live around a group of people who really care and care about me, who I can lean on. I can post a question on Nextdoor anytime I need anything, right? And so those sense of connections, right, with the people around you, like there is a way that technology platforms can be designed to facilitate those new connections, right? As Eden said, we know that meeting new people is incredibly important. How can we actually adapt all of our technology platforms to facilitate those new connections? Not just talking to the people you already know or the people you used to know, but like actually connecting with the people around you.
That's great. And I think that's a great little segue into, one of my final questions before we open it up to Q&A is, what are some of those opportunities and maybe potential challenges for continuing to develop in this space? And I see in the chat, one of our guests have asked, well, how are you thinking of adapting? Is there a need to adapt these technologies as we slowly go back into physical socializing? So I'm curious to hear, what you guys think are some of the hurdles and some of the opportunities, but then also what are we going to do when we are no longer in lockdown, if there are going to be any drastic changes on the technology side? Anyone who wants to be brave enough to go first? Danielle.
I'm happy to, because this one is actually relatively easy for Hopelab with our nod tool. We were designing this tool to get people off of the tool and out into the real world and connect with new people and go deeper with some of the connections that folks were starting to make in college. So that was an interesting design challenge for us pre-COVID. And that the opportunity there means that when we're all more back in person soon enough, we'll still be able to foster that through our Nod app. The opportunity we also saw, in addition to getting folks out into new ways of connecting socially, is to have folks come back to the app and process the feelings that come from perhaps stressful, new, challenging social connections with a lens of self-compassion. So we ask them to come back, rate their mood, and if they're feeling good, we support an intervention that allows those good feelings to remain longer. And if they're not feeling so good, we help them process those feelings with a lens of self-compassion. So some of that comes from self-compassion theory, Kristen Neff's work, as well as Julianne Holt-Lundstadt's work as well. I feel like Julianne Holt-Lundstadt is the node that brings a lot of folks together probably on this panel and in general across this forum. Her work is amazing. But we saw that as a key challenge to working in this space broadly, even independently of COVID. How do you use technology to help facilitate connection off of the technology? And it's hard because you want to be able to design to keep people learning what we think they need to learn and get the most out of the technology solution, as well as meeting young people where they're at, which is in many ways already online and on mobile. And also facilitate them not always using it, getting off of it in the right ways to make connections in the real world. So we'll keep continuing to design for that challenge, and as part of my role as a researcher, evaluating whether and how well we've done that. Not only in evaluating how people are feeling after using our Nod app, like are they getting less lonely, less depressed, less anxious, are they less likely to drop out of college, but also are they indeed using it in the way we expect to use it, kind of a burst at the beginning of the school year and then getting off because they no longer need it, which would be our ideal solution.
That's great to not use the technology as a metric of success for you, which I find quite lovely. Laure.
Yeah, so, well, I think there are a few things for us. One is that because of COVID, I guess the social dilemma got its moment. And so I think that that's raising a lot of questions for a lot of people about, how loneliness and social connection and social media all play into each other in interesting ways. So it's not simply, does social media cause loneliness, but it's also that when you're lonely and you're subjected to extreme viewpoints on one way or the other, that they're more appealing to you. And that is having a big effect for us as a culture. So ideally, you know, there'll be some moves. I think this is probably at a larger level than individuals, but maybe policy level decisions about what is okay as a business model, what kinds of, you know, where do we want to go from here in terms of the kinds of influence that technology can have in a big sense. And then I think there's also, for us in particular, even before COVID, we were seeing that the passion economy is a big thing. And now that people have been either displaced from work or they are looking for new things to do, we're really excited that people are, you know, looking for ways that they can make their passions a reality. And so the product that we're working on now is really focused on helping people to do that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how there's so many different factors, but for us in particular, I think loneliness and social connection will always be a big driver for how we're thinking about what we're making.
Yeah, I really appreciate what Laura said. I think it's really important for all of us as technology leaders to really interrogate what are our principles for building our platforms, and how do we actually want to emerge out of this moment to have the world look more the way that we would want to live in it, right? And so one of the things that, you know, we're, you know, looking at is how do we really, when we come out of, you know, needing to be socially distanced, right? How do we help neighborhoods become more vital places, right? How do we revitalize main streets around America and the world, honestly, because we're in 11 countries. And so one of the places that we're really leaning into is our local business platform, and really helping local businesses connect with their neighbors who are their most valuable and their most loyal customers. And, you know, like, how do we get more neighbors onto main streets? How do we get them back into restaurants? How do we get them back into their local shops and their stores? We are really thinking, you know, about that and building experiences right now for what we call the back together moment. You know, when neighbors are ready to get back together, when they're ready to gather in their normal neighborhood gathering places, how do we revitalize the neighborhood? And so again, as technology leaders, we need to measure not just our normal business metrics, but we have a neighborhood, again, our neighborhood vitality metric is a very, very critical one, and is just as important as, you know, revenue or monthly active users, right? Because we really believe that neighborhood vitality is the North Star of where we need to be going. And we also need to, you know, make sure that our customers are aligned with our principles. So, you know, some of our advertising customers have incredible campaigns. So last, right before COVID, we had Home Depot running in-person kids workshops. My 10-year-old went to Home Depot. I signed up for the workshop on Nextdoor through an ad that they were running, and she built like a little planter in a DIY Home Depot workshop. Apple this summer, their ads that were running on Nextdoor were for virtual digital camps for kids, right? And you could just sign up for a free Apple camp, a time slot for your child, right? They could make digital animation. So, you know, it's finding customers and finding a business model that is aligned with your principles, right? And that actually helps the company create a world that we want to live in, I think is critically important. And having the right leadership and the right metrics is the way that we're approaching that.
That's all very encouraging. I'm so happy to hear that from all of you. And before we move on, Tatyana, there is a question for you in the chat about privacy concerns, right? How do you find that people are concerned about providing too much information, particularly, you know, when the comfort of knowing that it's their neighbors, maybe, right? And whether that leaves them open to scams and thefts. What would you recommend for that?
So, you know, Nextdoor is a network where we verify that you're a real person who actually lives in the neighborhood, in the address that you say you live in. And so that actually creates a great deal of comfort for our members, knowing that these are people, actual neighbors in the neighborhood that they're talking to, not some random person around across the world who's posing as a neighbor. So that is the key, right, for providing a safe environment, is knowing that the person you're talking to, the people you're talking to and reaching out to and who are replying are one, real people, and two, that they actually live at this address. And that's been really at the core of Nextdoor for a long time. The other piece of this is that we do have community leads, right? Neighborhood leads. And these are people who live in the neighborhood, who are very well networked, who understand the norms of what's happening in the community. And they are our primary moderators on the platform. We have hundreds of thousands of them around the world. They're an incredibly motivated group of people, and they're motivated by giving back to their community. And they actually read, you know, a lot of the, you know, posts when they're marked suspicious. And because they have the local context, they're able to really ferret out problematic content in an incredibly precise way. So, you know, we've actually designed the system for safety, you know, and safety through proximity and verified neighbors.
Thank you. And I want to give the opportunity to Eden to also answer this question about the potential opportunities and challenges, and what do we do when we get out of COVID?
Yeah, so fortunately and unfortunately, I think there are a lot of opportunities and challenges here. And the three buckets that I wanted to quickly touch on were around research specifically, technology, and then collaboration. So on the research front, we still need a more robust understanding of the impact that technology has on loneliness and social connection, both in terms of what the technology looks like today, but also what we're trying to get the technology to become and what it could be in the future. The research currently right now on social media and technology more generally on loneliness is pretty limited, especially from a causal perspective, and it's still pretty inconclusive. And so we need more robust causal research, more incorporation of log data and mobile sensor data on how people are actually using technology instead of just relying on self-reported data. We need more of an understanding of the mechanisms that are at play if we do see effects for some of these. And we need a wider understanding of different types of technologies. So I think it'll be really hard to make and show progress unless we understand the situation holistically and we're able to measure and show progress. On the product front, I think actually everyone has touched upon really great things here. And another shout out to the Aspen Loneliness Report, because there's a lot of really great ideas around design solutions specifically, from focusing on topics like social comparison and meaningful interactions when they do have to be online, to what we've all kind of been touching upon of like this like hybrid technology that's really about getting technology to facilitate in-person interactions. And then lastly, on the collaboration front, loneliness at its core is a societal issue that requires many different key players coming together, from the research community to people's friends and families, their neighbors, to schools and governments and beyond. And I think a lot of people expect and desire for technology to do more and to solve more, but technology is just one piece in the puzzle. And I think we're at a point in society where we get to decide, you know, what role do we want social media to play in our lives? And how can we better harness its magic as a tool to solve some of these really, really complex challenges that society has faced for a long time? Loneliness is not a new thing. And so I think we're still at the infancy of understanding the role that social media could play here. And so bringing together a bunch of different key stakeholders at events like these are really, really important for unlocking some of that magic.
And just to add to that, there is evidence that doing less social media is healthy. So some of our technology may just be helping us to deal with our own inabilities to resist the siren call of these technologies that are, you know, they're so easy to get sucked into.
So that actually leads to a really interesting question that is coming out of some of the ones in the chat about, well, you know, the default and the assumption of this panel in particular is that you have access to these technologies. And so I'd like to hear from you guys, your thoughts about, communities that are traditionally more marginalized. How are we understanding their use? How is that informing maybe some of the new product design? What are some of the challenges and opportunities there? Everything from, learning how each platform works, but just the ability to connect, broadband. Broadband is a hot issue here. So I'd be curious to hear what you guys have, if you've put any thought into, okay, how about the people who aren't able to use the technology or can't at the moment? Anybody want to go for that one first? Do you guys have a second to think about it?
I can say that it's something that, I think is really important, and I don't think we have fully succeeded at yet, because we are a mobile technology on a smartphone only at this point. And so that is leaving out people who don't have access to smartphones. And, that's becoming fewer people all the time, but it's still a real thing. And so we've done a lot of work to try to help the technology be more easy to use for people who don't have a lot of technical skills. I've done a lot of work with people who are older, not technical, to help the technology work for them, but you have to have a smartphone to use it. And I think that's a problem that we see in a lot of these technologies, that, if you're the neighbor who doesn't have access to Nextdoor, does that actually, put you in a difficult position? Or if you're the kid who doesn't have access to, Instagram or something, like, what does that mean? So I think it's complicated, because as you probably, if anybody saw The Social Dilemma, there are even affluent people who are removing access to tech to their kids out of worries of their safety. So it'll be very interesting to see how access plays out in the future, I think.
And I completely agree. I think access is a huge issue. I think the other piece of it is just product development. So at Nextdoor, in our product development process, we actually, in the qualitative and the A/B testing, we have a methodology to ensure that minority groups are just as highly weighted, in our product development process. So for example, in our A/B testing methodology, we A/B test normally, as all apps do, just sort of with a proportion of people, but we also test in what we call key demographic areas, KDAs. And we want to make sure, when we do see a divergence in terms of the experience of the general population, and those in our key demographic groups, right, that we've identified as people who are less represented on our platform, that we actually interrogate why before we roll out the feature to 100%. And I think those tweaks in product development are really important, because otherwise you can run the risk of having a tyranny of the majority, because A/B testing will just give you data back based on what the majority wants, right? And so really having a thoughtful product team that really understands people, cultures and subcultures, right? So that they design their A/B testing methodology and they design their product development process to make sure everyone is included, or, the people who are generally excluded from the app, or at least included in the product development process. That's really critical.
Great. And I'm assuming you do that fairly with more qualitative interviews and small groups.
Yeah, so before the feature gets developed, we have several panels set up for, again, key groups that are less represented on our app, or that we want more representation around, right? So in the qualitative side, in the research side, and then when we actually get to A/B testing, we have another methodology around key demographic areas.
That's great, thank you. Good to know. Danielle?
Sure. So at Hopelab, we're thinking a lot about how to have a more equitable now and a more equitable future for young people. And that definitely includes the process by which we developed our Nod app. Similar to what Tatyana is describing, when we think about developing a new tool, we are incorporating diversity of voices in that tool. We have a phase that we call the discovery phase, where we're understanding the problem that we're aiming to to solve and the lived experience of the people who are experiencing that problem, in this case, loneliness among college students. So we're talking to a majority of students of color, making sure that we're getting diversity of student experiences in those voices. So students who are first generation students, international students, students from a wide range of socioeconomic backgrounds, and students who are able to find people like them at college, and students who are having challenges doing so, because we want to make sure that this tool is going to be a solution for everyone. The other piece that is extremely important to us at Hopelab, and again, part of the work that I do as Senior Director of Research, is to help evaluate whether our tools are actually having impact on the populations we aim to serve. So we care about traditional metrics of engagement, but we also care about whether the tools are indeed changing our experience, and specifically making people less lonely in the case of NOD. So we're ensuring when we're conducting a randomized trial, which we've completed, and a paper is about to come out in very, very soon in an open access journal. So please look out for that. We will certainly be announcing it on hopelab.org when it is indeed published, that looked at first year college students and whether NOD use was able to decrease loneliness, depression, and anxiety symptoms after using NOD. And we had over half of those students who were non-white who were in a trial. So it's an example of how we're thinking really purposefully about having diverse voices in development of our tools and in understanding for whom they work.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And we are at time. I could probably talk to all of you for the rest of the afternoon. So I really appreciate your time and your thoughts and your expertise today. I know Wes is gonna help usher people back into the main room. So I'll kick it over to you, Wes. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Kristine. And what an amazing discussion. The questions surrounding social technologies and the impact of these technologies on social isolation and loneliness is truly multidimensional and extremely nuanced. I want to, once again, on behalf of the coalition and everyone attending, I wanted to thank Kristine and the panelists for joining today. And obviously, we're all excited about all the innovative work and research your groups are doing and continue to do, so thank you. For those of you that are wishing to go back to the main session, we have posted the link within the chat. Let me just check here. And if anyone is having issues with joining the main session, please feel free to contact me or Sammy. Sammy's the individual who posted the link. We'll stay here for the next 5 minutes or so to make sure everyone has transitioned to the main session.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thank you, Kristine. Thank you, panelists.
Thanks.
See you.